Hello, welcome to the fifth episode of the Haredi Chick Speaks podcast. So I have a lot that I want to cover today. I'll get right to it. I hopefully titling this particular episode Mistress of the Mountain. Last episode was called The Handmaid's Tale, and I compared how different, very repressive aspects of the sexual ethics or sexual mores in The Handmaid's Tale is comparable for me to my experience, what I've seen in the Jewish community. And I got some pushback from it, and I wanted to address that. And I first appreciate all the feedback and all the listeners. And obviously, I especially appreciate the listeners who gave real positive feedback, so they felt like they connected with what I said. And I also want to give attention to the critique, but I stand by what I said, and that's why this title is kind of me doubling down, because I was saying how The Handmaid's Tale takes place in the Republic of Gilead. They named America Gilead. And Gilead is based on the biblical source of it is Yavesh Gilead, which kind of backstory connects to the story of Pilegesh Begiva, the woman who was a sexual partner but not married. It's like a wife without a ketubah to a man. And he reacted to her in anger, and the whole story then Hishtal Shell, carried on from there. So I guess I'm mistress of the mountain. It's just a fun, cool way of saying I'm doubling down on what I said. Because for me, I saw these resemblances. And it's not that I'm comparing and saying Jewish community is exactly like The Handmaid's Tale. Obviously not. Although there are societies that are pretty similar, these cults and very severe Christian cults. Like there's one in Australia or something, the way they spoke about it was really like that. But for me, recognizing these issues highlighted to the extreme in the form of fiction of The Handmaid's Tale was very comforting to me to be able to see that clarity and resonate with the points made. And that was just my perspective. And I think it is important for us to recognize when there are things that are wrong or that need to be cautious about, that they shouldn't continue to go down a bad path. And also in the episode titled Escaping the Cult, I was not saying, or I don't say, that all of Jewish society is a cult. I'm saying that certain ways that I experienced Jewish community was cultish. I was living in a brainwashed, manipulated way. And I do think that some areas within the Jewish community, like there's an actual cult, I think it's been disbanded in South Africa. That's a Hasidic Jewish cult. So you can't say that Jewish communities can never be a cult. And I think sometimes cult is a spectrum. And there's the actual cult, and then there's some communities within the Jewish community, or some ways certain homes are run, or certain schools, certain sub-communities or neighborhoods that can be very cultish and can be inhumane. And there was another point elucidated that we're a marginalized community, the Jewish community, especially the Frum Jewish community. media is constantly criticizing us. We have all different onslaughts from the outside. We're a protected class. And so how can I have the right to, on a public forum, add to that criticism? And my response to that would be that I would speak also in more limited settings. And there are things that I save that I wouldn't say publicly, but in a more limited setting, where there's, it's not recorded and not going to go on the internet. It would be just for a group of women or interested parties trying to address these issues and make changes. But in terms of not being able to speak at all, not sharing my negative experiences and the things that I feel should be changed. I was thinking about it actually, quite a while. And last night I realized this comparison. For example, the transgender debate. So I, for the most part, disagree with the transgender agenda. I think it's a nuanced issue, and I'm not going to outright say opinion on all of it. And definitely, I'm not an ethicist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a well-learned rabbi or rebbetzin or a psychologist. But for the most part, politically, I'm on the side. I'm not an ally of the transgender movement. But and so the transgender movement, a lot of them say, you can't criticize us, we're a marginalized community. And then you have individuals who transitioned to opposite gender and then they regretted it. Or all different various scenarios similar to that. It might have not been a complete transition, all different ways where people were pulled into the transgender movement on a personal level. And then they came to realize that it had been harmful to them, the orthodoxy of transgenderism. And they spoke up about their story. And then they were criticized by people in the transgender movement. The one who originally said, we're here for you, said, no, you can't speak. And these people are marginalized within the transgender community. Their experience, transgenderism, and so their voice should also matter. Just because they are part of their negative experiences were within the larger context of another marginalized community doesn't mean it's right to marginalize their voices for the sake of the community, marginalized as it is. And so I would say the same about the Jewish community. Torah has been, and the Jewish faith has been on onslaught for a long time. It's not a new thing. I have been studying the Sefer HaKuzari, written, I think, in the 900s. I don't remember by heart, but it was written a long time ago, and its original subtitle was In Defense of the Despised Faith, that Judaism has been under assault, and we've been needing to defend ourselves and our faith and our right to existence for a long time. But that doesn't mean that people who are being hurt, or people whose voices are being unheard, or people whose needs aren't being met within the Jewish community should feel like they have to be silent in order to protect the greater whole of their marginalized community. So I will stand up and defend the Jewish community. I consider myself part of the Jewish community. And I also have a right to a voice as a member of the Jewish community. And for a while, I felt like it's just me. Maybe I'm like an outlier. Maybe I'm just, a fluke. And then I meet more and more women who, in various ways, they've reached these kind of stumbling blocks where the community failed them, the system failed them. And we need to make sure that there's a system that doesn't crush some of the valuables towards the progress of making the greater good. That is not what Judaism is about. Judaism is about tikkun olam, bringing out a better world, a better society, but not by crushing individuals along the way, not by trampling on our most precious values along the way. And, I might it be a girl who had a broken engagement, and might it be a girl who, many women are divorced, and then there's just so many stories along the way where, my voice is not alone, and I don't need to say I don't belong, therefore, or it's just because I'm a weirdo or something. No, my experiences within the Jewish community, and I'm part of the Jewish community. I defend the Jewish community. I live my life trying to be an asset of the Jewish community. And yet I also maintain my right to speak up, to make the Jewish community better as well, and to speak up about things that are wrong and have my voice heard. My purpose here in this podcast is an outlet for myself, hopefully be a voice that other people can resonate with as well. I have many long-term, broader personal or career goals with this podcast. It might lead to expanding various businesses I have or creative works. But I'm not here to try to present myself as the leader or, taking the mantle of responsibility to make things perfect. Hopefully encourage those who can do that to do it. But on that topic, I was going to say that I did start an organization. The work that I do want to do in the Jewish community, helping others, social change, is I started an organization, Marpei Noga, which means a healing light. And maybe in another episode, I can speak more about the details, but that same ignorance and confusion. I have a brother who passed away that I strongly feel there was a lot of medical mismanagement and confusion. And I want to be a part of giving people access to knowledge, information, the correct professionals, and if they are struggling with various medical issues. So that's more the line of the social justice kind of work I want to do. And this podcast is just me, having a voice of my own. And so I did want to continue and also speak about why I feel like the comparison to The Handmaid's Tale in the Jewish community can sometimes be a accurate, pinprick comparison, not in completion. And so there's this thing, and that can sometimes happen when the girls are raised, completely with no sex, and then all of a sudden marriage, yes. And I do strongly believe in not having premarital sex. And then there's a whole nother conversation that needs to be more spoken about, which is postmarital sex, because that's another struggle within the Jewish community. All we speak about is people being shown again until they're married. And then what about the people who are not in a position to get married, or people who have been married and are looking for a second spouse? And I think that overall, this lack of talking at all, like this huge taboo about sexuality and sexual ethics in the Jewish community, it leaves people ignorant and vulnerable. And it also makes it that important topics of sexual ethics, like maintaining appropriate boundaries, not having sexual relations outside of marriage, be it after someone's divorced or a spouse died or before someone's married. All these issues are not spoken about thoughtfully. And part of the conversation does need to be about where, when, how, who should speak, what authorities should they portray when they give over this information, and what accountability do they have to have when they speak up. So I think that should all be part of the conversation. But I know a lot of religious communities where it's openly considered appropriate. It's not even just like people who are not living up to their standard. The standard has become, it's completely okay, physical contact outside of marriage, or complete sexual relations outside of marriage, either boyfriend and girlfriend before they're married. In communities where they're so strict about kosher, they're so strict about belief, they're so strict about Shabbos, and even strict about wearing only skirts. And once they're married, they'll cover their hair, the woman will cover their hair. But this important mitzvah, which is such a cornerstone to dignity and to healthy boundaries and the order of society and how we create society, this is such an erosion. And I don't see anyone seeking to give answers to that. And so that also is another thing that falls by the wayside. But the point I was making before about that in The Handmaid's Tale, sexuality has become just about like what God says, the spiritual, the religious ceremony, and it's all about making it just about fertility and just about what the government dictated they have to do and claiming that it's in the name of God. And all human emotion, all human feeling, psychology, all of that is wiped away. And sometimes in the Jewish community, there's complete disregard for the discomfort a girl might feel when she's completely not sexual and then suddenly turn it on. And I had that experience that I went to a Rebbetzin to ask her to give me more information about, this topic and how can I understand it in my mind, like wrap my head around it. And her response was, halachically, it's okay. And I was like trying to press her more on it. I'm like, okay, but I've been raised all these years completely the opposite. And now suddenly it's like a turn on the switch. I was trying to press her to give me more clarity, more nuance, more elaboration. And halacha should be good enough for you. And I was made to feel like I'm crazy, that that's not good enough. And so I really appreciate that Rebbetzin going out of her way. She was a college teacher. She could usually got paid for these stuff. She gave me a ride somewhere in order so that to a wedding that we were both going to, in order so that we can spend the time together. And who knows what else she would have wanted. She's a very busy woman, could have had quiet in the car ride. She could have called her children in the car ride. She could have listened to something more interesting in the car ride. And so I am really grateful for her efforts and her intention, but I think a well-known college teacher, it should be more in our community, this information at the fingertips of the people who are supposed to know. And thankfully, I don't want this to be just about criticism, and it doesn't need to be, because thankfully there have been some channels where this has been begun to be spoken about. And I did want to make one more point before I speak about where it is spoken in the Jewish community, is the reason why there needs to be more effort for education, for research, for culling of the ideas and presenting them in various venues, be it a book, be it interviews, be it more community lectures and network of support, is, for example, I have been trying to learn about this topic for the book that I want to write. And I saw this book in the library near my work. And then there was this other book written by a doctor, everything you wanted to know about sex, but were embarrassed to ask. And I was like, oh, cool, this is going to have a lot of information. And it had some information like breast tissue is really sweat glands and breast milk is really sweat with only like a few things added. It's just like cool, interesting information. But first of all, not everyone needs to be a biologist to study it so intensely. In order to have the right to have the basic information they need to know. Like, you don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car safely, but you need to know how to roll down and up your windows. You need to know how to turn on your car. You need to know that your oil needs to be changed however so often. So that's why it needs to be, you need to have the elite, leaders who take responsibility to become more knowledgeable and informed, and then those who bridge the gap and give over the information for the rest of the public, who are not necessarily ignorant in all of their life, and definitely shouldn't be, but shouldn't be obligated to know everything there is to know. And also, so this book that I was showing you, this yellow book, The Cosmic Embrace, I was looking into it, and it's not even about all the nuances, it's just art. And so I'm not interested in that. I don't think that we need to know about all deviancies, and I think deviancy. Anyway, I don't know how to pronounce that word, but we don't need to know about all the everything there is to know about this topic. And that's part of what is missing here, is the really guiding. Our community is about creating that guidance, creating the norms that are healthy, and there does need to be more effort on that. And something I heard from Rabbi Tovia Singer, he's very big on anti-missionary, and he said, all Jewish people don't need to know about Christianity in order to avoid the pit trap. That's not what needs to be taught in school in order to Jewish children won't eventually be converted to Christianity and be swayed by missionaries. He gave an example on that topic that I think is a mashal, an analogy that I think is applicable here as well. That he said there's a Secret Service agent who he once met, who worked in the field. Secret Service doesn't just protect the president and all those people. Part of what they do is protecting the US Treasury and money, making sure that there shouldn't be counterfeit. And he said, how did you learn how to do that? How to spot a counterfeit? Is it by being exposed to all different kinds of counterfeit? He said, no. We learned very, very, very well what is real money, how it feels, how it smells, all the different nuances of real money. So that we know it so well, we'll instantly spot a counterfeit. And so that's, part of the topic. And we do teach in schools midos and human behavior. And there also does need to be taught at some point, we need to find what's the right point. What is healthy sexuality? And then people can learn to understand and pick up when something is not healthy. And more pathways for how to fix it. So I now did want to speak about some really good changes that I have been seeing where people are speaking about it. And so I haven't read his books, but I did see that Rabbi Shmuley Boteach wrote a book. And then in that store near my house, Pomeranz, which is by Ben Yehuda, they did have a few books that I was just flipping through. I didn't even read the title that well, but they seemed to give some of that nuance and migvan. So there are some books. And then there's this channel called JTV that he conducted a debate was more of a shorter, like shared conversation on the topic of like how much skin to share. And he brought on someone who is more pro, she leads the Victoria's Secret, something to do with the Victoria's Secret show. And then a religious woman who spoke, obviously promoting more skin, promoting covering more skin. And there was a nuanced conversation on the topic. And I don't remember who those two people were. I didn't look it up, but in advance of this podcast episode, I looked up the names of the people who spoke in another podcast, in another debate. And that was, is marital sex, is sex before marriage good? And the woman who spoke pro not having sex outside of marriage was Gila Mandelson. And it was, I agree with that position, but I felt compelled to the other side almost because she didn't present it well. And I felt like we don't need to be defensive about it. And it was just like a little bit of an edge. And she also speaks so much to non-religious audiences, and there wasn't full answers to what would be said to religious audiences. If we do have a Rebbitzin, Gila Mandelson, who is an expert and well-versed on this topic, well, why isn't she speaking in religious schools? Why isn't she speaking in religious communities? And so, only people who are having sex should be spoken to about why they shouldn't. Why shouldn't religious girls be spoken to about understanding the sexual ethics and, from a Jewish perspective instead of just being left in the dark? And the woman who spoke pro was Jill Filipovic. She's a journalist, and she wrote a book, The H Spot, The Feminism Path to Happiness. I think that's the name of her book. She spoke really well, and she brought up the point of the difficulty that if there's no sex at all before marriage, and then suddenly you're married and flip a switch, and especially women don't work that way. So that's something to really think through about how to be nuanced. I think it's a real issue. Like I mentioned before, that Shetelmacher, tons of college tell them they're petrified. And I don't think that that's an acceptable norm. And something I do believe that we should continue to have people not have sex before they're married. And I think that we can't just disregard these really serious issues around it. We need to find answers. And she said also that oftentimes in societies, when you couple sex with marriage, then it oftentimes is accompanied by this attitude of like women having to be the gatekeeper, and that is inappropriate. Each person has to be responsible of their own behaviors, and it kind of can cause this attitude of denigrating women. And the whole point of the Jewish ethics is about uplifting women, but the actual pathway can lead us the opposite. And I don't think that we can just say, oh, it's automatic. And she gave an example. She lived in Williamsburg, and she said these Hasidic men would completely mistreat her just walking in the street. And so it's a real issue in various places. And she also said that oftentimes in societies where women are expected, where women and men expected to not have sex before marriage, then it's a society that holds women back, that they can't be independent, they can't have a career. And Gila Mandelson responded and said, no, you don't have to not have a career just because you're choosing this traditional lifestyle in this regard. And she's right, it doesn't have to be. And the Torah does not command that women can't have a job and a career. But I think that that's another trap that we need to be careful not to fall down. And because you can't say that it doesn't happen, it does. And therefore, it's up to us if we really do want to continue to promote the value and the beauty of this way of life. We have to make sure that it's not connected of, that to make sure that in our community that women really are allowed to pursue their dreams, their goals, a career where they feel competent, where they feel capable, where they feel an asset to society, community, where they can be self-earning and be the architects of their own lives. And then I guess just saying, the people who do claim themselves as an experts in the Jewish community, it can't just be because they read Miriam Adaham's and Tehillah Abramov's book. They learned halachas, now they're an expert. I think that there should be an obligation and a standard set, like at least to reach for, to study psychology, to study human behavior, human mind, human thought, to be more knowledgeable if you're going to proclaim yourself as an expert. And then the other two people on JTV channel, Rabbi Daniel Rowe and Rabbi Eliezer Zobin, they both gave very thoughtful answers to these issues. So I would encourage you to look up their interviews on JTV, and I wish that they would speak more and in other forums, and maybe they're the ones who could be called upon to write a book. I don't have a personal connection with them, so it's not, and anyway, I don't think it's a place of some random girl to go and tell a rabbi, you should write a book. But they spoke really nuanced and thoughtful about this topic. And for me, I searched so long in confusion, originally being told you're not allowed to know, you have to stay naive. It's a virtue to be naive. And then it's a virtue to walk confused, to be confused. And then when I did try to find, I couldn't find it in the Jewish community. And so I found Catholic philosophers, specifically the ones who were promoting traditional marriage. There's someone, Jules Van Schoychik, the Van Hildebrand Project, all different philosophers who are not Jewish, who helped me be able to see the full richness and understanding of how to navigate as a human socially in the world. And I was really happy to see that. Also, when I went to Aish HaTorah, Rabbi Nachmeyer, he responded to a different woman's question on a similar topic, and he was able to bring across nuance. And so maybe he could be someone who can give more information on this topic and speak in other venues, not just, especially now that Aish Essentials has been closed down. So what Rabbi Daniel Rose spoke about is all the different, he spoke a lot about relationships and the goal of the relationship. But one point that I can recall is a neurobiological point, which obviously I'll remember because that's where my heart is, in neurobiology. And he said that there's different chemicals that get expressed in the brain that elicit those feelings of feeling like you're in love, you have a crush, and you feel infatuated with someone. And so when someone falls in love, that really is a true thing. It's a true experience, and it's neurobiologically based. But the thing is over time, when you're with someone for a consistently long time, that high-end expression of the neurotransmitters, it dissipates, it calms down, it regulates a bit. And so if your relationship is just being held together by neurotransmitters, by the level of neurotransmitter in your brain, then that's not going to hold a relationship together, and it will fall apart. And so if you dating or living together long term while you're having those sexual connections, then at some point that's going to dissipate. But if you make sure that in that time, and he said, I think about 3 years is how long it lasts, if during that time you use that infatuation and that passion to build the foundations for a relationship that will endure, even when the neurotransmitter levels go up and down and fluctuate, then that's the recipe for for success. And Rabbi Nachman spoke about was like how marriage between a man and a woman staying married is so important for society. He gave the example of the kibbutz, where children were raised in the children's house and they weren't raised with their parents. And you see most kibbutznikim, especially the ones that the community was arranged like that, where the children didn't live with their parents, they eventually rebelled and left the kibbutz lifestyle, because society needs those pillars upon which to stand. But then a compassionate society will have place for people who don't fit in. And so I think that we need both sides. We need to reinforce the values of why we should have, society stands on certain pillars, and we need to make sure that in this pillars that we build and we enforce is there space for people who don't fit in. And then Rabbi Eliezer Zobin, he spoke really thoughtfully. He said that a person's body is not their own. God gave it to them. And sexuality you shouldn't use your body for a purpose that denigrates your humanity. So the same way you're not allowed to use someone else, you can't also have yourself be used. And instead, it should be done in a way that, and in a context that respects all of the human person, psychologically, not just physically, but also psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. So when it's in the context of a home that's being built together to raise children, to do chesed, to have guests, the whole context of a committed relationship, then it's serving that respectful purpose. And that's a lot of the topic of what those Catholic philosophers said, that any kind of physical experience, it should be in mind of the whole person, dignity of the whole person. And in that note, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, I've never read his books, but I'm really lucky to hear a lot of Divrei Torah said from what he's taught through friends that I go to for Shabbos tables. And a lot of what he speaks is about the dignity of a human. What does it mean to be a human? And one of his main point is that we have the capacity for change and for choice. And that's what makes humans dignified. And so, if we reinforce what is the makeup of a human that helps us be more dignified. Kuzari does touch on it as well, specifically what's the difference between an animal and a human and a Jew, human and a Jew. And so these different nuances and understanding our potential of who we are can help reinforce the understanding of how different aspects of who we are should be expressed in ways that respect us and bring us towards our potential instead of being destructive. And so those, I really am grateful to the head of JTV for bringing all these people to his channel so that I can hear what they had to say. And his name is Ali Anisfeld. And that's another shout out to Aish HaTorah because he is an alumni of Aish HaTorah. And then another book, Circle, Arrow, Spiral. I actually have it somewhere in my house. I was trying to find it today to show you, but I couldn't find it. I have so many books, so everything is like all over the place. But that's another book about the nature of man versus woman and how we, how we can see woman's place in society, man's place in society in a way that there's true equality and true respect for the dignity of each person. And that was a fascinating book. I've read parts of it. I haven't read the whole of it yet. And so those are just some, I hope the foundation stones of where I hope to see the community continue to be able to go in terms of enriching and reinforcing and building a better society with regard to these thoughtful issues. And so, yeah, I guess the one last thing I would say is, sometimes when we bring up like thought needs to be cared for this kind of person with this struggle, this disability, this children should be given more tutoring if they need that help. And people respond oftentimes and say, well, life is too busy. How can we have time for that? There's so much yet still to be done. And first of all, look backwards. There used to never be something like Kahal. And I actually recently met the daughter of the person who created Kahal. I think his name is Norman Blumenthal. And so many programs that used to not exist. And when they were first brought up as a potential, they were completely, oh, that's impossible. How can we do it? And nowadays there really has been brought about answers. And we don't believe that children who are disabled should be euthanized, God forbid, or just left to languish. We really do believe in nurturing them, caring for them, bringing them into and part of our society as much as possible, helping parents to be able to have them live in their home. And so we believe in it. It's in line with our beliefs. And so why shouldn't it also be lived out in these aspects of society as well? And many things that have seemed impossible have become possible. And I also think of 100 years ago, we didn't have Shabbos clocks. We didn't have Shabbos lamps. All different ways in which our lives and our spiritual lives have progressed. Society has progressed. And we need to stop and say now, like, society's continuing to progress, continuing to move forward. 50 years from now, our world will be so much more comfortable. We'll have all these conveniences. We'll be able to be so much more productive because of these advances that have come about. Shouldn't we take the reins into our own hands of what kind of more advanced, in what kind of ways should society be more advanced? Shouldn't that also include saying, even at the cost of advancement in other areas, we should make sure that we bring everyone with us? That part of that advancement should be individuals with disability get higher care, their potential is fully seen. So, imagine they invent a kind of eye gaze computer that's able to be used on Shabbos for people with ALS. That's possible. So shouldn't we also envision a shidduch system where less and less people are being left behind? A shidduch system where each and every person's unique needs can have a space to be met. And so, that's really my hope for the future. I always like to be positive and optimistic. And so in speaking out, it wasn't about bringing people down. It's about making sure that everyone gets to be brought up. So that's the Mistress of the Mountain.